Alright guys, so the first pattern we're going to look into is the module pattern and a slight variation of it called the revealing module pattern. Now I do want to mention that ES6 or ES 2015 introduced actual modules in JavaScript, meaning that we can use separate files to export modules, which are just custom pieces of code, and import them into a new file. However, this is still not supported in browsers. You'll have to use a compiler like Babel along with a module loader like Webpack for that to work, and we will be getting into that later. But in ES5 we have something called the module pattern that allows us to break up parts of our code into self-contained modules with private properties and methods, or private variables and functions. So this is actually my favorite pattern, and we're going to build a 12 video calorie counter application with it in the next section. So let's take a look at how the module pattern works, as well as the revealing module pattern. So basically what we want to do, we have our index.html here, just have a heading, and then we're connecting our app.js. But the way that the module pattern is set up, let me just give you a basic structure here. So we have a module which is going to be an IFI. Okay, I don't know if you guys remember what an IFI is. It's a immediately invoked function expression, and it runs right away. So we need to wrap it in parentheses to make it an expression. We need to put a function in here, an anonymous function, and we need to put parentheses after it to run it. And then the idea of the module pattern is to declare private variables and functions up here, and then we have a return. And what I mean by private, meaning that we can't access it from outside the module. And then whatever we return, this is where we declare public variables and functions. All right, so that's the blueprint for the module pattern. Now we're going to have a pretty large project. It's going to be a calorie tracker using the module pattern, where we're going to have an item controller. Okay, each module will be its own controller. We'll have an item controller that'll take care of the meal items that we add. We'll have a UI controller that will take care of anything to do with the UI, so clicks and form submissions, rendering stuff in the UI. Anything to do with that will be in the UI controller. We'll have a storage controller that will persist things to local storage, and then we'll have a main app controller where everything will kind of meet, and we'll call an initializer. All right, so what I'm going to do here is comment this out, and let's create a module called UI controller. So UI CTRL, and we're going to set that to a module. So this will be an IFI. And like I said, anything we declare up here is going to be private. So I'm going to create a variable called text, and I'm going to set that to the text of hello world. And then all I want to have here is a function that's going to change this heading right here, this h1, to whatever is in this text. So let's go ahead and create a variable. So this will be a function expression. We'll create a variable called change text, and we'll set it to a function. And let's say const element, and let's grab that h1. So document dot, let's do query selector, and we'll just grab it by the tag, so h1. And then we're going to say element dot text content and set that to text. Okay, so we can access any value, any variables we put up here, we can access from within this function. Now both of these are private. We can't access these from outside of this module, of the UI controller module. Let me just put a comment here. I'm saying that this is the standard module pattern, and what we want to do is return something from this module. Okay, so what we return is going to be public, which is stuff that we can access from outside. So I'm going to have a function called call change text and set that to a function, and then let's run change text, because we can access the private values, the private variables, the private functions. We can access from within these public functions. All right, so we'll do that, and we'll also go ahead and console.log text just to show you that we can access that variable directly. Okay, so now outside of the module, which would be down here, we can say UI controller dot call change text. All right, so we'll go ahead and save, and you can see that it actually changes to hello world. It also logs hello world, which is coming from right here. Now, if I were to try to console log, actually I'll just do it over here in Chrome. If I were to take the UI controller, and you'll see I can do call change text, which we just did. I can't, however, do change text. If I do that, it's going to say change text is not a function, because I can't access this private function from outside. All right, and we get the same error if I tried it over here. In fact, I'll do that. So I'll say UI controller dot change text, and you see I get the same error. And if we try to access, let's say UI controller dot text, if we try to access this right here and save that, you'll see that change text is not a function. Let me just comment that out, so it's blocking it. And you'll see that we'll get undefined for that. This hello world is coming from this right here. If I were to comment this out, you'll see we just get undefined. Okay, so that's the foundation of the module pattern. We have private stuff here, and whatever is in this return is going to be public. So let's go ahead and comment this out, and I'm going to give you an example of the revealing module pattern, which is very, very similar. The main difference is that instead of returning our own public functions like we did here, you basically map an object literal, and you map to private functions that you want to reveal. And that's why it's called the revealing pattern, because you can reveal certain methods from your module. So what we're going to do here, we're going to use a different example, and let's call this the item controller. So this will be like a data-based controller, and we'll set that to a module, which is just an IFI, so a function that invokes automatically. And let's say let data, and we're going to set that to an empty array. So this can be thought of as our state. All right, and then we'll create private methods here like add. So we'll say add, and that'll take in an item, and then we'll just take that data array and we'll push onto it that item, and then we'll simply just do a console.log, and we'll say item added. All right, now a lot of times you might see an underscore with variables like this, because this is a private variable. If you remember back in, I think it was section 2, when we talked about conventions for naming variables, I told you that you can do this, it's allowed, but you should only do it if it's a private variable, and you're only going to deal with private variables in more advanced stuff like this, like using different patterns. So that's where you might see that. I don't do that. I don't use the underscore, but you might see that in other people's code, or you may want to use it yourself. So let's also create a function called get, and for get, it's going to take in an ID. Okay, so it'll take an item ID, and then I'm going to return the data, and I'm just going to use the find method here, and then pass in a value. Actually, we'll say item, and let's set that to an arrow function, and then we'll return, let's say return item dot ID if it's equal to the ID that's passed in. All right, so those are add and get, and right now these are completely private. So if we go down here and we say return. And what we're going to return is an object literal here with add, let's say add, and set that to add, and then say get and set that to get, making those, basically revealing these methods. So then we can go down here and we can say item controller dot add, and then let's pass in here an object with an ID. We'll just say ID1 and name John, and save that, and we get item added. All right, and we could even go in here now and say item controller, and we could do get, and let's get the item with the ID of 1, and it gives us John. Okay, and we can do the same thing over here. So we'll say item dot get the ID of 1. Actually, we'll need to console dot log that. Whoops, item controller. Okay, and I could add another item here if I wanted. I don't know why items are people, but that's fine. We'll say Mark, and then we'll get the item with 2, and you can see we get Mark. Now, if I were to not have this right here, if I comment that out, that's going to make this private. Okay, if we don't include it in this return, it's going to be private, and if I save, we're going to get an error saying that it's not a function. All right, so that's one of the main differences between the revealing module and the standard module pattern, is that we're mapping, or we're returning an object literal that directly reveals methods that are inside of the module. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Now, this looks cleaner, the revealing module pattern. It does look cleaner, but this allows you to do more, because you can, you can call change text, but you can do other stuff as well, like console log something, without having to include it in your actual private method. So, I mean, it's all up to you what you want to use, and it depends on what you're building as well. So, it's all up to you. My job is to just introduce you to these patterns and these ways of doing things, and then you make your choice on what you want to do. All right, guys, so that's going to be it for this video. In the next video, I want to talk about the Singleton pattern, which is actually another variation of the module pattern. It uses an iffy, but it's a little different, where it's used to create objects, but you can only instantiate the object once. So we'll get into that next.